Thanks for being with me, everybody. In this particular episode, I'm going to talk about the way I view people from a therapeutic perspective. So I understand that this may not be the way that you would necessarily view them, but it is an interesting way, I think, of analysing, of considering the way we interpret what we see, how we see it, and how we filter it through our own judgments, if you like. So we have at one level, we have people who encounter the criminal justice system, who are simply people who have become homeless or who have a drug addiction or who have a mental well-being problem. And whenever we see a report in relation to them, we tend to jump to judgments about who these people are without necessarily understanding their stories. On the other hand, we have people who have power, who have political power, who have a media influence such as Murdoch, and our politicians such as Albanese or Morrison or Dutton. So how do we compare these two groups of people? How do we filter who they are and the value that they have in terms of how they contribute to society? It's an interesting discussion. So let's just see where it takes us. One of the things that I've always focused on is respecting people for their positions, for who they are, for how they think about themselves. And one of the things that has been really important to me has been being able to identify the way they view themselves and the qualities that they have that need to be also respected. Now, I've been able to do that in a number of ways. The first thing I often do is to not necessarily see somebody as they are presenting. So their story, whatever that looks like, is not necessarily who they are. It is simply their story, and that they represent or their life has manifested itself in such a way that also tends to reflect the way that they view themselves. However, I don't necessarily believe that that's the way we need to view them as well. We don't need to necessarily see them in the same way that they see themselves. We can often approach each particular person with a fresh view as to who they are and how they may choose to fit in this world. And what I've found is that when we're able to identify this different way of viewing people, when we're able to see them differently, that they can then endeavour to see themselves in the same way. So when we offer a compliment, for example, to somebody, often people will say, well, you know, that's not me, I don't see how you see that, I don't understand why it is that you're saying what you're saying, in fact. But the reality is that there's some part of them that takes on, well, maybe there is this different version of me, maybe there is a different way of viewing who I am and how I fit into this world that I have not seen. And if they trust you and they believe in the work that you're doing together, then there's a good chance that they might start to accept some of those things that you might be saying about them. Now, what I wanted to focus on here today is the way we tend to view people and how that impacts the way they may choose to view themselves. Now, there are two groups of people, I think, that sit in this world that we really need to talk about. One of them is those people that don't seem to be entitled to anything. They have very poor outcomes. They have terrible, terrible pasts and backgrounds which most of us would be grateful we don't have. They come from, often, in many cases, violent relationships. Some of the people that I've worked with have been sexually abused as children. They have a background which, if given the choice, they would not choose, but has been inflicted upon them for varying reasons. Now, one of the problems, I think, is that we all tend to want to view people based on the story that they tell. or the story that is being told us, particularly by the media. And we need to be really mindful that if a person has a drug problem, if they have mental well-being problems, if they're homeless, if they've been in a domestic violence relationship, or even been the abuser in a DV relationship, whether they've been sexually abused as a child, whether they've had parents who have neglected them, whatever are the circumstances, it is important for us all to understand what is it that brought those circumstances about in the first place, and to acknowledge that that isn't their fault, that they don't necessarily ask for those sorts of environments, that for whatever reason they have experienced environments which have been harmful to them. Now, for many people it's really difficult to dismiss those environments, to say that they no longer matter, to decide to change those experiences, because for many people they're so entrenched that they find it difficult to view themselves as anything apart from what they have experienced. What I often see in people is creativity, ingenuity, the desire to survive regardless of the terrible circumstances that they have encountered. Those people I admire, and they are most of the people that I've experienced throughout my practice over 30 odd years. But how do we, as a population, how do we experience these people? It is a regret that we judge them, that we we see them solely as the picture painted to us, generally by the media or through social media in particular. That we see them as being that homeless person, as the drug addict, as the violent person, as the abuser. And we don't often look to understand and to better comprehend their past and how their past has brought them to those situations in the first place. And particularly for those children, how children had terrible circumstances imposed upon them that were not of their creation, but certainly were created by others. And we must find a way to better understand those stories before we judge them. Because once we understand those stories and the implications that they have had, we'll probably be less likely to judge them for the outcome or the experience that's being reflected through the media. So we need to try and find ways to better understand those stories and to listen to them, not to just see what it is, the scanty view that is presented to us via the media. That's really unhelpful. We need to find out more about these people. Or the alternative is simply not to accept at face value what it is that is depicted to us through photos or through articles written in the media or stories that are followed up through social media. So that's one level. The other level is, of course, dealing with those people who clearly do wrongs, but who are in a position of power and authority that allows them to get away with the wrongs that they have done. And I guess politicians, robo-debt in current times is an example of where that's come to play out. That we've seen people with positions of power demonstrate their inability to be able to empathise with the people that have less power, those people over which they wish to influence how much money those people on welfare, provide to the government in order to meet the government's debts. Now, should we view those people in the same way as that I was talking about earlier in relation to others who simply had terrible circumstances impact their lives? Well, we should understand what it is that makes those people tick, nevertheless, whether it be politicians like Scott Morrison or Stuart Robert or whoever it might be. That we need to understand that they have been influenced by something. And normally what they're influenced by is political power. And that influence and the way they behave around that has very little to do with the way they were raised as children, perhaps. Except it is worth noting that many of these people have attended public schools. They have had the best opportunities in life. They've had legal professions or professions which have stood them in good stead in terms of income and power and authority within the community. So those people have had something that other people haven't had. It doesn't mean that some of those people haven't come from terrible backgrounds or experiences. I mean, Anthony Albanese came from public housing, single mum, whatever. So a lot of those people rise above that level and become something else. But should we forgive? Should we better understand where these people have come from and why they make the decisions that they do? Should we better understand Rupert Murdoch, for example, where he's come from and what it is that has impacted his life, that has developed him into the tyrannical, paranoid influencer that he has become? No, I don't think that we necessarily need to understand him in greater detail as a result of that, apart from the fact that perhaps we need to understand that his father was quite abusive and that, you know, maybe to some extent his sense of self-esteem and who he is and how he values himself is based on the influence and power that he manifests, and the same with someone like Donald Trump. So it helps us to understand who they are, but doesn't mean that it excuses their behaviour. No, it doesn't. In fact, I need to say that there is nothing that excuses bad behaviour, regardless of where one comes from. Nothing. So let's be clear about that. But if we can understand where people come from, that has brought about who they are, and who they are has developed an environment which is harmful to them, to their children and to others, then perhaps we can stop being as judgmental of them as what we would normally be. And particularly when it comes to understanding who they are, not only will we become less judgmental, but if we have conversations with them, they will be able to understand that we understand them better than anyone else. Thanks for being with me, everybody. Take care, look after yourselves, and be safe.